Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I'm flying solo this week. Let's get right to it. The House and Senate are still both out and will not return until after the election. 1 year ago today, Hamas terrorists stormed into Israel, murdered 1,200 Israelis, and took 250 hostages back into Gaza with them to use them as bargaining chips with the Israeli government. A number of those hostages were American citizens. 4 of them are still held in captivity. They are Keith Siegel, a 65-year-old grandfather born in California and raised in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Eden Alexander, a 20-year-old who grew up in Tenafly, New Jersey. Sagui Dekel Chen, a 36-year-old father of 3, and Omer Nutro, a 22-year-old native New Yorker. In 4 weeks, it will have been exactly 45 years since November 4, 1979. That was the day 52 Americans were taken hostage by a group of radical Muslim terrorists in Tehran. The 1980 election between incumbent President Jimmy Carter and his Republican challenger Ronald Reagan took place exactly 1 year to the day after those Americans were taken hostage in Iran, and had a lot to do with the outcome of that presidential contest, a 40-state sweep for Reagan. 4 weeks from tomorrow, a second American presidential election will take place with the backdrop of American citizens being held hostage by radical Muslims in the Middle East. The American media has been shockingly silent on this issue. When the 52 Americans were taken hostage by Iran back in 1979, there was a constant barrage of media coverage. Walter Cronkite, the most revered newsman of the time, marked day 50 of that hostage-taking by adding a count of how many days it had been since the hostages had been taken. And he added 1 day to the count on every one of his nightly news broadcasts until they were released after 444 days in captivity on January 20, 1981, with their release timed so that the plane flying them out of Tehran left Iranian airspace before noon Eastern Time in Washington, D.C., where Ronald Reagan was about to be inaugurated. The Iranian mullahs were so scared of Reagan and what he might do that they wanted the hostages all the way out of Iranian airspace before he put his hand on the Bible to take the oath of office. Back then, Iran's radical Muslim leaders actually feared the American president. Now let's talk about anti-Trump lawfare. On Wednesday of last week, Judge Tanya Chutkan unsealed portions of Biden-Harris Department of Justice Special Counsel Jack Smith's new 180-page indictment of former President Donald Trump, which was necessitated by the Supreme Court's ruling that presidents enjoy some immunity for official acts. Smith was required to go back and redo his charging documents, making the same allegations he originally had while taking out some evidence he had originally wanted to include. Though she referred to Smith's request as, quote, procedurally irregular, end quote, the judge nevertheless granted his request that his filing be unsealed before the before the trial, allowing the public to see 165 pages worth of allegations masquerading as legal argument. I've said it many, many times before on this broadcast. I am not a lawyer, and I don't even play one on TV. But this stinks. This seems to me to be a clear violation of the defendant's right to due process, the right to confront his accusers, to cross-examine witnesses, to challenge the introduction of evidence. By releasing the details of the allegations before he even gets inside a courtroom in front of a jury, Smith is trying Trump in the public square, and Trump's hands are legally tied behind his back. CNN's senior legal analyst, Elie Honig, referred to the special counsel's filing as, quote, an unprincipled, norm-breaking practice, end quote. Honig added that, quote, Smith has essentially abandoned any pretense. He'll bend any rule, switch up on any practice, so long as he gets to chip away at Trump's electoral prospects, end quote. In other words, this isn't about anything other than putting Trump on trial before the biggest jury he can find, the American electorate, without allowing Trump the due process he is guaranteed under the Constitution. Now let's talk about the campaign. There are 29 days left until Election Day, but early voting is going on all over the country. Make a plan to vote, whether in person, early voting, if your state offers that, or by absentee ballot. Please don't wait until Election Day. You don't want to be stuck with an unplanned event of some kind that keeps you from getting to the polls and casting a vote in a timely fashion. This election is too important for that. Now let's talk about some unions that took some action. 3 items of note on the organized labor front. First, the striking International Longshoremen's Association, the ILA, which had struck 18 ports on the East Coast and the Gulf Coast, shutting down all shipping traffic beginning at a minute after midnight on Tuesday night, ended its strike almost as fast as it began, agreeing to accept a 62% wage hike over the next 6 years and putting off until January 15, conveniently right before the inauguration of the next president, discussions over protecting their union members from automation. I don't know about you, but I think a 10% guaranteed pay raise every year for the next 6 years sounds pretty good. I don't think the union leadership decided to do a favor for the Biden-Harris administration, even though their decision to end the strike for now certainly helps the Biden-Harris administration and therefore the Harris campaign by avoiding the calamity that would have occurred with a supply chain shutdown 5 weeks before an election. I think they came to the decision they did because they realized that if they continued their strike, even as multiple states were recovering from a devastating hurricane, they might look a bit selfish and put themselves behind the 8 ball in future negotiations. Second, the International Association of Firefighters on Thursday joined the Teamsters in announcing that they would make no endorsement in the presidential race. The Teamsters had announced their non-endorsement 2 weeks earlier, as we discussed. The Firefighters Union was the first major labor union to endorse Joe Biden in 2020. But it also sat out the 2016 election, choosing not to endorse Hillary Clinton. Now to the debate. Last Tuesday, the 2 vice presidential running mates, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, debated at the CBS studio in New York with CBS Evening News anchor Norah O'Donnell and Face the Nation host Margaret Brennan moderating. Except they didn't so much moderate as do their best to show the public that the dominant media isn't putting its thumb on the scale. It's jumping up and down with all its collective body weight on the scale. If it had been a prize fight, they would have called it in the second round. Vance was on and Walz was not. It was the most lopsided debate since June 27, since Donald Trump took Joe Biden to the woodshed. In fact, it may even have been more lopsided than that debate, if truth be told. To my mind, and over my 4 decades doing this for a living, I've watched an awful lot of debates. There were 3 moments that stood out and may be remembered. First, when Walz was asked about what the moderator referred to euphemistically as a discrepancy between where he said he was on June 4, 1989, when the Chinese Communist government cracked down on pro-democracy protesters in Tiananmen Square, and where records actually showed he was. In other words, he had been caught in a lie, claiming to have been in China when the crackdown took place, when in fact he didn't get there until long after the crackdown had done its work. He stumbled through an answer for 2 minutes, not addressing the question at all, only to find the moderator determined to follow up. When she pointed out that he had not, in fact, answered the question, he admitted in some contrived locution that he had misspoken. The second moment that stood out was when Vance got into an exchange with both moderators about the legal status of many of the Haitian immigrants now living in Springfield, Ohio, many of whom are there because they arrived in the United States using the CBP One app, a smartphone app designed and implemented by the Biden-Harris administration to help those who want to come to the United States bypass the line and the dangers of making the trek on foot. The app lets them tell the U.S. government when they want to arrive and allows them to pre-schedule an appointment at a legal border entry point to make an application for asylum or parole on their smartphone. During the course of the Biden-Harris administration, the CBP One app has been used by more than 800,000 immigrants to gain entry to the United States under the guise of applying for asylum or parole. When moderator Margaret Brennan began to fact-check Vance, he spoke up, quote, "Since you're fact-checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So, there's an application called the CBP One app where you can go on and apply for asylum or apply for parole and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand," he said. CBS cut off his mic. Score that one for Vance. Anytime the dominant media actually cuts off a conservative's mic on national TV, that's a win for the conservative. The third memorable moment came at the very end of the debate, long after many people had turned it off. It was Walz's only moment to shine. He challenged Vance with a simple question as to whether Vance believed Trump had won the 2020 election. Vance took a moment to gather his thoughts, then pivoted to an answer that employed what we used to call the matador defense. He let the question slide right by, like a matador pivoting and letting a charging bull go right by. Harris finally blitzes the media. It's been months since she became the presumptive Democrat nominee for president, and Kamala Harris has still sat for so few interviews that I can count them on one hand. So this week, according to her campaign, she's going to make the rounds. She will sit with the women of The View, talk to Sirius XM radio host Howard Stern, and visit with Stephen Colbert of The Late Show. The media blitz began with an appearance on a podcast called Call Her Daddy. Oh, for the days of Tim Russert on Meet the Press. Now to the Jenny Beth Show. Episode 89 of the Jenny Beth Show dropped last Wednesday, featuring Jenny Beth's discussion with Terry Schilling of the American Principles Project, which, as Terry says, does for parental rights what the National Rifle Association and Gun Owners of America do for gun rights. Jenny Beth and Terry have an eye-opening discussion about the multi-billion-dollar business of medical experimentation on our nation's children. It goes by the name transgenderism. It's a fascinating and disturbing discussion and throws a lot of new light on the subject. Highly recommended. And that's our Washington report for this week. Now to the call to action. There are 29 days left until Election Day, and in many states, early voting has already begun. If you've not yet joined our action team, please go to marchtovictory.com to help get out the vote. That's marchtovictory.com. If you live in Georgia, our affiliated super PAC, Tea Party Patriots Citizens Fund, is paying people to go door to door. Most importantly, if you live in a battleground state, please sign up to help increase voter turnout. We'll send you instructions on how to download our new app and use that app to reach your family and friends to be sure they get out and vote. You and your efforts could make the difference between victory and defeat in the November elections. As always, if you have a question or a comment, you can email us at jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. That's jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. If you want me to answer a question on air, just add "for broadcast" to the subject line. We'll see you next week. Until then, be well and be active.